A couple of things I think it's probably good for us to make clear. Number one is I always say, there's no such thing as one generation being better than the other. Well, welcome everyone to the Mindshift podcast. I am Michael Pagnotta, the founder of the Mindshift Group, an executive coach and business strategist. And with me today is basically a friend and a co-collaborator who I am working with. Welcome to Alisa Grafton.
Thank you, Michael. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm very excited.
So let's start because, we're going to go into a series. You and I, over the next 3 episodes, we're going to have 3 episodes all around a series all around the Boomers to Zoomers and all in-betweeners.
Yes.
And it's something that is passionate for both of us, really. We both are quite passionate about this topic. Maybe it'd be good, Alisa, to tell us a bit more about, why you're passionate about it, how we started working together, and how we've ended up here today and for the next few episodes.
Yes, with pleasure, Michael. So my passion was born really out of practical experiences working with different generations. I have been now practicing lawyer for over 20 years. In different roles, but lately in very senior roles as a partner or a consultant. So working for legal firms, you end up working in very hierarchical, quite traditional structure when it comes to generational placements. And I experienced that sense of sometimes chasm between different generations, misunderstanding. And that spurred me on to doing work on understanding how different generations can come together, connect together, communicate better. This also stems from my work as a networking speaker or speaker on networking and an expert on networking. I feel that combining those 2 aspects, connections building, relationships building, and the generational work, it really can be very significant and valuable for a modern workplace. And going back to how we met, I think it was a few months back when I went to one of your talks, and I was completely mesmerized by.
Oh, thank you. I tried.
Well, you did very well, but also just by how much kind of commonality that we have in our thinking on generations. And I felt it would be really valuable if we could bring our expertise and our skills together. And it looks like this is very much what we're doing here today.
It is. And actually, I think before we even go into the detail, which we're going to be exploring today, and a couple of things I think it's probably good for us to make clear. Number one is I always say, there's no such thing as one generation being better than the other, because the reality is every generation thinks the other that they're better than the other. But I think the other thing is actually perhaps establishing from the onset, where we sit as our generations ourselves. I mean, I'm a Gen X. Right? So Gen X is anyone born between 1965 and 1981, 82. The research puts it anywhere between 1981, 82, 83, but I tend to go between that 81, 82 area. So, but pretty much that's the Gen X. Where do you fall into it?
Well, as we discovered quite early on, we, I think, very similar in age.
Yes.
So and I think it actually makes probably our work easier, but also more interesting because we have we come from different backgrounds, but we also have a very strong common point of being of the same generation and effectively the same age. But also I think our generation, interesting because we are what's known as Xennials. So we are that tail end of Generation X, very much on the cusp of with Millennials. So we understand the Millennials probably better than some older Gen Xers, yet we still have the work ethics and lots of other things that, when it comes to generally applying ourselves, that Gen X are well known for. So I think we actually, our in a very interesting position.
We are,
to talk about this.
And it is an interesting point. I mean, and I think getting your feedback and your experience, because you run a lot of networking events, and it'll be interesting to get your thoughts on one of the critical things and probably one of the biggest criticisms that the Gen Z get a lot of is their inability to have conversations with people, to have face-to-face conversations, to pick up a phone and talk to someone. Be interesting in a moment, as we talk today, to get your thoughts, about, well, actually, let's go into it now. I mean, from your point of view, in your expertise as a networker and someone who runs these events, do you find you have a lot of millennials, Gen Z who come to these events because they don't have the skill set, or actually do you find they are very competent, that it's a misconception?
I think the general view of Gen Zers specifically as someone who is less comfortable with face-to-face interaction, that general view is correct in my experience. I mostly attend networking events rather than purposefully run them. But what I do notice is that there are usually very much generational groups.
Interesting.
That come together. And perhaps it's not really from sort of evolutionary perspective, it's not very strange, because we do we gravitate to people that we are similar to.
Yes.
So it's perhaps not surprising that older generations gravitate to each other, and the younger generations gravitate to each other as well. What is quite unusual, though, is that a reticence, especially for Gen Zers, actually connect, or the ease of connection with someone who looks different to them. And I think
you mean someone who's older.
Someone who's older, yes.
Let's name it. Yeah. Someone who's older.
Who is older, exactly. And actually sometimes it's even connecting between themselves.
Yeah.
And they find it, as we know, so much easier to connect online. It's never trouble for a Gen Zer to reach out to someone online and connect with them and then develop that kind of online relationship. But when it comes to offline connections, that's when we see the biggest difference between the way older generations connect or open to connections making versus the younger generations.
I mean, it's an interesting point, because it probably starts to explain and delve into some of the key topics we're going to cover over the next 3 episodes. And, if we look at baby boomers, anyone born between 1946 and 1964, they're post-war babies. They are very much where they were, brought up by their parents after the war in order to just work. And it was all about engaging with people, because things like the radio and telephone, the biggest invention for them, or I say invention, but the biggest technological advancement for them was the television, and specifically the color television. And so for them, everything was, in a way, and there are some similarities between generations, it was technology, it was through a screen, but you would go and talk about at a Christmas party, at a work party, you would go and talk about what you perhaps had seen on the television and what you'd heard on the radio. And it was a place for striking up a conversation, but meeting people was very much, and how you engage with people was very much a part of how well you were recognized in your company, the relationships you had with people, your promotion opportunities as well. And there was this big expression that I'm sure even you and I heard from our own parents who were baby boomers, around keep your head down and you'll be fine. And when you think about it, that may have worked for us to know that, you work hard, keep your head down, work hard, keep going, graft, and you'll eventually get up there, but you got to persevere. Baby boomers were the same. We as Gen X had that mentality, but of course we started thinking about the work-life balance a bit more. Flip it on the other side, millennials, and especially Gen Z, there's no such thing as keep your head down. It's about, no, be proud. You have a voice, which completely is the right approach. But perhaps what we haven't done is caveated it with, you have a right to speak your mind. You have a right to make sure that your thoughts are heard, that your voice is heard, that you're respected, that you're not taken advantage of. But you also have to recognize that you're not entitled to anything.
I agree.
And that's where that sense of entitlement starts to come in.
Yes, I completely agree. This is probably one of the most significant differences between the older and the younger generations, if we can put it that way. When it comes to especially workplace culture, there was a general and based expectation from older generations to do exactly as you've said. Keep your head down, work hard. Loyalty, as we know, was a very precious commodity.
Yes.
Loyalty almost always to one employer for life.
I mean that's important. How many people do you know
Yes.
that have been with the same company for 20, 30 years?
Yes, exactly. And in fact, when I started, there were people who started as assistants at the same firm, and then they worked their way up to become partners, then run the firm, and then literally retired while still being in the same office where they started 30 years previous to that.
And that, just on that note, just for clarifying for everyone who's listening and watching, you are a lawyer as well.
I am, yes.
We're coming at it from, it's not like we're coming at it from very different, we're
Yes.
coming at it from so many industries. You're a lawyer. You'll tell us a bit more of what law again is you practice?
I'm a notary public, which is the third branch of the legal profession, but the oldest branch.
Yeah.
So it also comes with a certain quite conservative values.
Yeah.
Which, to be honest, the legal industry is generally known for, but notaries are not traditional notarial firms are especially quite, rigid
Yes.
in how they develop in their traditional values. So I very much, in fact, have experienced what you've talked about, that kind of very much loyalty first, hard graft first approach to work. And no one expected that without that you would thrive or you would grow, that you would achieve success. And then we, within literally the space of 20 years, have experienced a complete change in expectations when it comes to younger generations. And I love your work on that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, kind of on that instant gratification that is expected by the younger generation. I think social media and everything we see online has to a degree promoted the values of things happening immediately, or the expectation that there will be immediate feedback, immediate success, which is very much goes against the mentality of the older generation. In fact, I think that's probably where the older and the younger generations really cannot agree on. No.
It's that hard work, instant gratification.
Yes.
It's an interesting one because, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and I've actually had a lot of clients. So as an executive coach, I work with probably the whole range and gamut. I've got clients who are as young as 23 years old, 24 years old, who use me as a bit of a mentor sounding board. And then I've got clients who are in their 50s, some of them almost near retirement, already talking about the next phase of their career. And what's interesting when I'm having these conversations is that we talk about this hard work, this instant gratification, this expectation. Now, one could argue, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. One could argue that those baby boomers and Gen Xers who have been with the same company for 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years, and suddenly they're being told they're being made redundant after 25 years of service, and they are literally behaving in that, how dare they, after everything I've done for them all. Well, one could argue, but that's a sense of entitlement. You think that because you've been loyal to a company for 25 years, they owe you. Now, my response in life is no one in life, whether it's an employer, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your friends, whether it's your barista, no one owes you anything.
I agree.
But we flip that sense of entitlement to a younger generation. And immediately it's that instant gratification, why aren't we actually getting what we need? But I've done this, and I had to have a difficult conversation with a client recently who said to me, is it normal for my boss and my managers to give me the responsibility of a more senior role? And what they've said to me is, well, we need to see you can do it. So you need to show us over the next 6 months you can do it. And then if we see that you are able to do it, then we'll gladly give you the promotion and the pay rise that comes with it. But we're not going to just promote you because you think you deserve it and you say you can do it, but we haven't seen you being able to do it. So show us you can do it. And I flipped the question around to her and I said, let's imagine you don't perform at that level. So you try and do it and you don't perform. Imagine you were given the promotion and you get that job title and the salary that comes with it, but 6 months in, you're not delivering. What do you think they as a company would have to do? And she went, oh my God, they'd have to fire me. I said, right. So now ask yourself, are they not setting you up to succeed by proving you can? And then recognizing the development that you've got? And she went, I had never thought of it that way. And I said, why do you think that would be? She goes, I know. She goes, I know, because we want everything now. I said, I rest my case. There is a sense that you got to ask yourself though, why? Why don't you have that patience? And she said to me, she goes, I'm not going to lie, Michael, I know it's one of the biggest things. And she goes, I'm a Gen X she goes, I'm a Gen Z. And I can honestly say, I see it with my friends, I see it with people I've gone to school with. It's the biggest problem we have. It's the one thing that I think is true. We don't have the patience. We do expect things immediately because we don't want to see them through.
And I think as frustrating as it can be for someone who is either baby boomer or have the same mentality or even an older Gen X, there are also very strong reasons or formative events that define that mentality when it comes to work ethics or general sort of life mentality. Let's not forget that Gen Zers are the first generation of true digital natives.
Yes.
Which means that they have never known life without a mobile phone or some sort of electronic device that they can, have instant access to. No other generation has experienced that, not even the millennials.
No, you're right.
And I think that defines their mentality when it comes to just about anything in life. Because if you log on to social media, that you see obviously a very polished version of people's success. Very few people would put the post of how they have come to achieve something, all of the blood and sweat and the hard work. It's just not very glamorous, not very glossy, let's face it. That is why what we see normally on social media is that very refined, very polished, very glossy final product. And you and I know that this is the case, but younger people who have really not yet got the life experience, they might just see it as, as it.
But you say that, but interestingly, if you listen to someone like Stephen Bartlett on his, Diaries of a CEO,
yes,
he makes it really evident, and he's a millennial, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I think so.
He's the millennial, and he actually says very openly what he's done to get where he is today. And he gives in one of his early podcasts, he talks about an employee who comes to him and expects a raise after 6 months. And he actually openly says, and he swore when he said it, he goes, I'm sorry, but I'm, fucked off that someone thinks that you can just come into a workforce and expect a salary pay rise after 6 months. And he actually says, he goes, I'm the first person to give people opportunity and want to see people grow and make sure people are paid right. but you need to prove yourself to it. And it's interesting hearing that from a millennial and someone who talks openly about the challenges, where he has struggled, how, he's had doors closed on him. So all of those things make a huge difference. It's really interesting as a millennial that he openly tells a story. And I think this sense of, being upfront and saying, no one owes you anything and no one deserves to suddenly get something just like that is quite a powerful message. And I think you're right. There is the formative years. I would argue as well that we have to give credit where credit is due. Millennials and especially Gen Z, one of the things they are very good at is using technology to be more efficient, to get things done quicker,
Sure.
easier. Mm-hmm. Let's be honest. I'm sure you and I remember when we were growing up and when we could think, oh, well, we can do it better and faster than our parents were showing us. There's a quicker way. There's an easier way. I'm sure every generation does that. Having said that, again, playing devil's advocate, I would say, great, they can do that, but I also believe they don't check their work. And this is something that comes up a lot in the companies and the clients I work with is the Gen Xers, the Gen Z feel that they're being micromanaged because their managers are picking up on small things. And the small things are the things that make a real problem for managers because they're going, I shouldn't be picking up on the number of spelling mistakes or inaccuracy or things that haven't been double checked. I've got no issue, with my team. I'll tell my team when I work with them, I have no issue with you guys using AI. Use it. If it gets the job done quicker and easier, if it gives you ideas, great. But do not submit me a piece of work where I've got the errors because you're using the wrong spelling or because you haven't fact checked or you haven't double checked this information.
And I wonder whether this is, I've certainly experienced that actually in my offices, in my work, but I wonder whether it's also to do with the fact that Gen Zers do not have that complete overview of the processes that a company has to go through. Because when older generations started work, you would start very much obviously working in the office, shadowing your more senior colleagues, seeing how different processes work and why things are needed in a certain way. You would be communicating face-to-face with clients, well, obviously depending on the industry, but you would know, for example, that certain things need to be done in a certain way because that is a legitimate client's expectation.
Yeah.
Rather than just something that your boss has a bee in the bonnet about. And I think younger generation working often flexibly at home in a hybrid or fully remote settings, they do not really have kind of that visibility of the different processes and the complex structure that actually defines the need for these, attention to detail effectively. And that is one of the things that I often talk in my masterclasses about, is being a lot more intentional when we are, as older leaders, speak to younger generations and explain to them not just, well, I want you to do X, Y, as we were told, for example.
Yes.
But explain why. So that they have, that they also invested in the final result. It may not be visible. You know
what, that's a really valid point, because actually, if we look at what the Millennials and the Gen Z are very much about, they aren't, we grew up, I remember when I first started working, not only in part-time jobs, but after I graduated and got my first job, I remember was, who do you work for? And it was, I work for, and you named the company. But the Millennials and Gen Z, especially Gen Z, is I work with someone. I don't work for someone.
True.
No one owes me. And I think it's a valid point. Yeah. I think it's a really important thing to think about, because actually employers need to remember that. You don't own anyone. And you are, when I hear employers say, I'm paying you a salary to do X, Y, and Z, and You're paying them a salary to work, to do something, but they don't, you are not, that employee is not owned by you.
Yes.
Because, and that's probably one of the fundamental things that employers need to be aware of, and organizations. Interestingly, some companies are starting to now implement what they call shadow boards or junior boards, bringing the younger generation and creating these boards of younger people to both mentor the senior leadership teams or sit in some of the meetings and share their own insights, which then end up giving the ELTs, the C-suite ELTs, a bit more of an understanding of, maybe looking at it from a different perspective is good, and how do we future-proof the business? Vice versa, to your point, Alisa, it helps the junior board members and these younger generations understand, guess what? Things take time. In an organization, it's not as simple as, we want to do X, we have the money, let's do it. There's a whole series of hurdles and hoops and everything else you've got to jump through before you can actually get the result.
Absolutely agreed. And I think one of the probably most important determining factor in the success of intergenerational workplace is that exact appreciation for a different starting mode for Gen Zers and Millennials as well. They're very much looking to actively participate in the solutions making. I don't think the leaders of today can anymore just tell people what to do or how to do things and instruct them. I think these times have truly gone, and those who do not yet accept and appreciate it, they're probably not going to have very effective workforce. They're probably going to lose people. They're going to be a huge turnaround in their staff. I think younger people, exactly through those shadow or junior boards, as you've mentioned, and lots of other initiatives, are being encouraged to be part of the solution making. So if there is a problem, they need to be seen as someone who has a voice, who have something to say. They obviously, I think we need to, and we'll talk about this, we'll need to very much manage their expectations, because they might have a voice and opinion, but they do not exactly have the same expertise or experience and the knowledge. But I think that there is that acceptance that, every generation has something worthy to give and needs to be listened to. And as you said earlier, actually, credit needs to be given to them having the skills that others do not.
Yeah, and look, I completely agree with you there. I think it, what you've said there is a very powerful message about this sense of leaders not just telling someone what to do, but and also, and I still see it, people and leaders who will say, do as I say, not as I do. The big thing now is about bringing people on a journey. And by bringing them on a journey, you need to make them feel part of it, which is why one of the big things about the Generation Z and the Millennials is the values, especially for Gen Z, the values and impact of a company. And making sure that if they're going to devote and give 40 hours of their time each week to an employer, they wanted to be doing so for organizations where they feel they are adding value to the greater good. And that's an important piece as a result of that, to your point, which is, how do I bring people on a journey with me and make them feel part of the journey? Now, at the same time, we've already talked a bit about the impact and formative years of technology. With baby boomers, you talked about, I mentioned about the television and radio. With Gen X, it was actually the internet that was the big thing. Huge thing. Millennials was the mobile phone.
Right.
And then Gen Z is, as you said, they're digital nomads. For them, they just don't know anything else. But there's other elements that also play a part And it's some of the, besides technology, there's some of the things such as we'll start with the social impact. So, when we think of things like the baby boomers, we know that for them, one of the biggest things was human rights movements, the big thing of, make love, not war, the hippie movement, right? So there's a lot of that human rights activism started kicking in for the baby boomers, which was a big thing. What are your thoughts on, because from a social movement from for Gen Xers and maybe you see more of it, you have more insight on this from a millennial or the Gen Z. What we'll call them Zennials. It'll be much easier going forwards because I keep getting X and Z mixed up. So Zennials. So with the Zennials and Millennials, what do you think are some of the main factors contributing from an X, a lot of it for Gen X, it was a lot around racial equality, a lot of it around gay rights. Those were massive things that pushed. And of course, it was from a social point of view, it was also the Gen Xers who began the whole work-life balance movement. From a millennial and zennial point of view, what are your thoughts on what do you think are some of those social aspects that triggered how they behave and how they work today?
Well, this is my favorite topic.
Oh, good.
So I'm very
Here's what I prepared earlier for you.
Well, I think it's a very interesting question because it really speaks to the world tomorrow that we're going to be living in tomorrow, as well as what we're experiencing right now. They say that specifically Gen Zers are the most connected generation.
That's right.
And they are, in the sense that they have friends literally all over the globe, because it's so easy to make friends, online. You could be communicating or messaging, someone on a online platform,
anywhere
in the world.
Yeah.
And that's no more difficult than messaging your neighbor, for example, because you can keep up with your friends, you can literally collaborate with people around the world, and that sense of connection is there. But I think this is hugely to the detriment of the actual in-person connection.
So are you saying there, just so I clarify and I understand it, that one of the most powerful things of how connected they are because of globalization and technology is also working against them?
I think you can say that.
Okay.
Yes. I don't, I probably should say outright, I don't think these two things
just say it outright. Say it outright, Alisa. You're allowed. We're allowed.
Well, I'm glad.
Freedom of speech here.
I don't think these two things are mutually exclusive. I think you can absolutely be very well connected online and have also offline connection skills or connections making skills. But there is one thing that I'm genuinely concerned about. And this is the fact that Gen Zers have had very or less exposure than any other generation, I think, in the history of humanity to how people connect face to face. I mean, let's face it, we are, someone who communicates not just verbally. We know that body language actually makes for a huge proportion of the way we communicate. It's our emotions. It's the way we sort of look into the eyes of the person in front of us.
The non-verbal messaging as well,
which is huge.
Absolutely.
It's huge how much easier it is to feel empathy with someone who is sitting opposite you rather than who is sitting across the screen. And all these things, of course, have huge evolutionary significance to us because that's how we survived and thrived as social beings.
Yeah.
So this is where I believe Generation Zers are being disadvantaged because they have not had through the history of the pandemic. A lot of older Gen Zers had to finish their education offline, and then they would be joining the workforce in the times when everyone was working remotely or in a hybrid settings. So they did not have these opportunities to learn by experience, by watching others, by osmosis, how to connect with people. And unfortunately, that's just kind of that lack of experience is getting, becoming worse rather than
better. But I mean, if we were to say that, let's say we go down this route, I mean, the other one argument to that point you've made, and I'm not, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, and it's not about agreeing or disagreeing, but I think you absolutely make a valid point. I could see it on the other hand, though, where because of technology and globalization, these younger generations are so much quicker and faster at being able to, they want to learn something, bang, they're on TikTok, they're on Insta, they're on YouTube, and they learn how to do it, they master it, and before you know it, they've developed a skill set that for you and I would probably be like, where's the right course that I can enroll on? I mean, I still do that. It's literally, it's like, I have learned now where I've gone, I'm going to just try and see something, if there's a course out there on TikTok, or I look for a video and I'm like, oh, okay, great. And suddenly I'm like, brilliant, things I didn't even realize. I was on a holiday in Vancouver recently, and was with a girlfriend of mine, and she had brought her son. My husband was there, and the son turns to me, and because he was literally we were going, oh, where are we going to go out to eat? And there was me on my laptop, open table,
restaurant nearby.
And her son, 30 years old, so he's he would be exactly on the cusp of pretty much a Zennial, right?
Yes.
Turns around, he goes, yeah, I found one book that, I'm like, what? He goes, well, I heard what you guys were talking about, so I found this great Vietnamese place. It's over here. What did you do? Oh, I just went on TikTok, literally did a search for best Vietnamese restaurants in Vancouver, and bang, this one came up. It's right near where we are. Done. I'm like, oh my God. I still was going 4 people, so it's like, but I learned from that. So 2 nights later, we're looking to go for dinner. I'm on the bed in our room, and I literally just go on TikTok and restaurants. I fancy Greek. Bang, one comes up. Saw it really close to where we were staying. 4.5 or 4.6 stars. I'm like, called them, made a reservation. Done. And they're like, well, Mike, where'd you find this place? I go, well, so you do.
A younger friend of mine recommended. I think there is a lot we need to learn. I really value and treasure my Gen Z of friends, because I find that they enrich my life, they educate me, they show me ways that I probably would not have realized if I only, would hang out with people my age. Absolutely. But I suppose there is still that very strong sentiment that there is that, we're talking now about the ways to learn about the world online. But when someone asks a Gen Zer to introduce themselves or to meet people, say at a networking event or in some social settings, just face to face, that's where they
freeze.
They freeze, they clam up, they feel that, they are absolutely out of their comfort zone. This is where their level of anxiety, social anxiety, rises. And my sense is that this, we all know that if these connections making, relationship making skill is really a social muscle. The more you expose yourself to this kind of scenarios, the more you meet people, the more you learn how to communicate with people, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
And of course, if you do not have opportunities or as many opportunities as probably other generations had at that time, then it affects the way you prepared, or the fluidity with which you do this. But I am concerned that it means ultimately that people will be devoid of those essential soft skills, essential social skills, just to to enjoy life, to walk through life, to actually enjoy a socially successful life, and that translates into personal success as well as professional success.
I mean, and I think that's a really good place for us to start wrapping up, because in a way, I would argue that Millennials and Gen Z are very good at enjoying life. They know how to enjoy life. They're very big on the work-life balance. They are very big on their mental health. But also we need to be aware of, and this is where I think we will explore in the coming series, the coming episodes we'll do, which is we also need to be aware that you can't use mental health as a weapon, because we are seeing it. The minute a tough conversation has to happen, we see it's affecting my mental health. If I told you the amount of times as a coach I hear from younger generations talking about how a challenging conversation with their manager and the stress about it, or the way they were spoken to, is starting to put pressure and stress and affecting their mental health. And I have to really work with them to make them understand, let's be careful of how you're framing this. I think the words you use there about social anxiety, I think it's more around the anxiety they're having. So as we explore in the next few episodes, one of the things we'll talk about is what can organizations do? What can managers do to make them build the resilience to have these conversations? Perhaps underpinning, and one of the things we'll look at is what are some of the factors that have contributed to this inability or lack of resilience? Because, we do need to explore the fact of how education and the education system and the parenting system has failed. I was shocked when a friend of mine who's got a young kid goes, I came home and I was told off by the nursery school about the fact that they heard me say no to the child and we're not allowed to use the word no. And I thought, well, she of course turned around and said, like hell, I'm not using no. I'm going to use no. It's like...
Well, that's it. Yes, absolutely. It's a staple word for parenting.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, but all these things I think have contributed to some of the challenges that these generations are facing. And that's why when we started today, I was very clear about this isn't about bashing one and one is better. There isn't, because there's a lot to learn. But what we need to look at is how organizations, how leaders and managers can help develop that skill set. At the same time, the things we can learn, as we've talked about, what have we as Gen Xers already learned from some of these younger generations? And I'm learning a lot myself. And that's because of the things I never thought of. And I think as we build on this, it'll be interesting to see where it can go. And we will have some guest speakers with us as well.
And I'm very much looking forward to that, because I think that bringing this different point of view, or very much kind of lived point of view, for example, of someone from a much younger generation than us.
Yes.
I think that would be very interesting also for us to compare notes and to actually see whether their experience of what we're talking about is aligned with our view of the experience. But to your point, I'm actually extremely excited about going under the skin of these things, because I think that when it comes to such topics as social anxiety or resilience, there is a lot of information out there. And of course, people usually sort of take a very strong view either one way or another. As you have, in my experience, you have absolutely correctly identified anxiety being extremely important issue, but also sometimes it's overused and sometimes probably unnecessary use to explain or to excuse certain things, where actually, perhaps other solutions can be more usefully and more effectively utilized. Resilience is a huge topic that seems to be being promoted in a lot of schools at the moment. Speaking from experience, we constantly have some sort of talks going on at our school about resilience that, resilience this, which is very important. But what is resilience? And how do you arrive resilience? How do you bring up people that have the right measure of resilience, and how do you marry it with with something like anxiety?
Yes.
Where do these two intertwine, and how can you be free of anxiety and supplement those kind of vacuum left by
Yeah.
Anxiety with, more resilience to life's challenges. So I think these are very interesting topics, both for leaders as well as for Gen Zers or Xennials, because it's very much kind of goes to the heart of what they experience often on a day-to-day basis.
I agree. And I think, it'll be a great way to build on it. And you're absolutely right. Hearing from some of the either younger generation, some experts in the fields will be really, really good, because I think what we're going to hopefully be able to do with this, if anything, is if it just even educates, one person, or if there's one baby boomer or Gen Xer who suddenly listens and goes, oh, I never thought of it that way, and suddenly approaches a conversation differently. Or maybe there's a millennial or Gen Zer who suddenly thinks, oh, do you know what, actually, I'm guilty of doing that. Maybe let me take a different approach. And it starts by just shaping and reframing our minds and our thought processes. But look, in the meantime, I'm really excited. So we've got 2 more episodes of the series here on Boomers, Zoomers, and all in-betweeners on the Mindshift podcast. Alisa Grafton and I are going to be pretty much co-hosting these, and we're going to have some guests with us. So stay tuned for more episodes that are going to be coming. And until then, as I always say, remember that you have the right to design and drive your future. So thank you very much. Alisa, I'm looking forward to the next stage.
And so am I. And thank you very much for co-hosting this one with me.
It is a pleasure.